The beginning of it on land, they're little tiny things, and by the end, there were forests. So Devonian is when you get a land environment that starts to look like something you might recognize. You go from nothing to forest.
You know what's wild? The fact that we've been living on this rock for billions of years, and there were creatures roaming around way before those big bad dinos. Like, seriously, what were these prehistoric beings like? Were they chill, or were they straight up nightmares? Well, hold on, because we're about to take a trip down time and explore what Earth was like before the dinos crashed the party. And let me tell you, it's a world you definitely wouldn't want to visit without some serious firepower. Think you've got what it takes to handle the terror of the pre-dino era? Tag along. First things first, let's talk about the Earth's age. It's thought our planet is approximately 4.54 billion years old. It's hard to even comprehend a number that big. But before the dinosaurs came into existence, the Earth was apparently already a few billion years old. That's a lot of time for some pretty interesting things to happen. Let's start at the beginning, about 4.5 billion years back. It was a pretty rough neighborhood back then, with all sorts of debris smashing into each other. But eventually the dust started to clump together, forming tiny grains that would eventually become the building blocks of planets. As these tiny grains collided, they stuck together, forming larger and larger objects called planetesimals. These planetesimals were like baby planets, and they were constantly slamming into each other, merging and growing bigger. But the violence didn't stop there. In fact, it only got worse as the planetesimals grew larger. Some of them were big enough to create their own gravitational fields, pulling in even more debris and causing more collisions. And let me tell you, being hit by a rock the size of a mountain is not fun. Eventually, after millions of years of these cosmic bumper cars, Earth had grown big enough to attract a thick atmosphere of gas. The atmosphere was mostly made up of hydrogen and helium, which would later be blown away by the solar wind, but it also contained small amounts of heavier elements like carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, which would play a key role in life. Now you might be thinking about water. Well, here's where things get really interesting. Some scientists were not exactly sure where Earth's water came from, but there are a few theories. One possibility is that it was brought here by comets or asteroids. Another is that it was formed right here on Earth through a process called outgassing. Basically, this means the water molecules were released from the interior of the planet as it cooled down and solidified. But regardless of how it got here, water was the most important factor in shaping the early Earth. Now, after the Earth had water, things started to get pretty interesting. Some believe that the earliest life forms that we know of started appearing. They say that these were microscopic organisms that lived in the ocean. So don't get too excited. Apparently they were simple, single-celled creatures that didn't have a whole lot going on in terms of complexity, but they were the first life forms to call our planet home, we are told. Now, as time passed, the theory says that more complex organisms began to emerge and that insects and plants started to appear on land around 400 million years ago. Can you imagine what the world would have looked like? No giant trees, no flowers, just a whole lot of moss and algae. It's hard to picture, but kind of fascinating to think about. But let's fast forward a bit. The theory goes on to say that around 250 million years ago, the Earth was a very different place. This was the time of the Permian period, and it was a time of great change. It wasn't the cozy little Earth that we know and love today. No, it was more like a Mad Max movie on steroids. The continents were all clumped together in one giant supercontinent known as Pangaea, which basically means all lands in Greek. It's as if all the countries in the world decided to have a giant group hug and just squish together. But that's not even the wildest part. The Permian period was home to some of the craziest creatures to ever roam the Earth. We're talking about massive beasts like the Gorgonopsid, which was basically a saber-toothed tiger on steroids. It had massive jaws and teeth that could crush bones like they were candy. I mean, imagine walking through the forest and coming face to face with that thing. You'd be a goner. But it wasn't just land creatures that were causing chaos. The oceans were teeming with giant sea monsters too. There was the DUNKLEOSTEUS, a giant fish with armor-like plates on its head that could slice through anything with ease. And let's not forget about the Mosasaurus, which was basically a 50-foot-long alligator on steroids. You definitely don't want to come across that one, trust me. Wondering about the cute and cuddly creatures? Well, there were some of those too. Alright, but not really much. You see, even the creatures that we would consider harmless today were pretty terrifying back then. Take the Dimetrodon, for example. It was a lizard-like creature with a massive sail on its back that it used to regulate its body temperature. But it also had razor-sharp teeth and claws that could tear you apart in seconds. So yeah, not exactly a snuggly little pet. Now, about the end of the Permian period, there was a complete disaster that totally changed the landscape. But what caused all of this chaos and destruction? Well, there are a few theories, but the most widely accepted one is that a massive volcanic eruption caused worldwide climate change. The eruption was so huge that it covered an area the size of the United States with lava and ash. This led to a massive extinction, even known as the Great Dying, where over 90% of all species on Earth were wiped out. I mean, when you give an event a nickname like that, you know it's not going to be a happy story. And speaking of deserts, the climate turned so dry and hot that most of the world's forests had disappeared, leaving behind only scrubby shrubs and hardy items. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part was what was happening in the oceans, that the oceans were turning into giant toxic cesspools. Now, I don't want to get too technical here, but basically what was happening was that a bunch of volcanoes were spewing out massive amounts of lava, which was releasing all sorts of nasty gases into the atmosphere. These gases, like carbon dioxide and methane, caused the Earth to heat up, which in turn caused the oceans to become more acidic. And when I say more acidic, I mean the pH level was dropping faster than a drunk guy at a frat party. So what did all of this acid do to the oceans? Well, it killed off a lot of the creatures that lived there. But that's not even the worst part. All these creatures died and decomposed. They released even more gases into the atmosphere, which made things even worse. It was a death cycle, and it was happening on a scale that we can't even imagine. But wait, there's more. As if things weren't bad enough already, there was also this thing called a methane burp happening. Now, methane is a powerful greenhouse gas, which means it's even more effective at trapping heat than carbon dioxide. So when all of this methane was released, it caused the Earth to heat up even more, which caused even more creatures to die off, which caused even more gases to be released, and so on and so forth. It was like a never-ending cycle of death and destruction. So, what happened in the end? Well, as you might have guessed, it wasn't good. By the time the Permian period came to an end, around 96% of all marine species and 70% of all terrestrial species, it was the largest mass extinction event in Earth's history, and it took millions of years for life to recover. So, if you guys thought the asteroid strike was the biggest extinction level event, then you might be wrong. This one is. You see, the end of the Permian period wasn't just the end of an era, it was also the beginning of a new one. A new era where the Earth was ripe for new life to emerge and take over. And that's exactly what happened. Yup, the dinos. We all have wondered what the Earth looked like several centuries back, and it's a real mind twister. The same goes for the mysterious Bermuda Triangle. Many who flew or sailed across this part of the ocean never made their way back home. Is it true that the Bermuda Triangle is nothing but a gateway to another dimension? To find out, check out our next video. Anyway, if you guys loved today's episode, don't forget to drop your comments below, and we'll meet again with another episode soon. Until then, stay tuned.